This happened on New Year's Eve in 2019. I was a college senior at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and had been eagerly waiting for winter break. Unfortunately, my finals had run late, so I missed the family Christmas celebration. New Year's Eve was my chance to make it up, and I was looking forward to driving home to Green Bay to join my parents for a family party. I was already feeling pretty bummed about spending Christmas alone, and the weather wasn't helping. The roads were clear of snow but shrouded in the kind of cold, biting wind that cut right through your coat. To make matters worse, I was stuck driving my family's old station wagon because our primary car was in the shop. The heater barely worked, and the sound system was on the fritz, leaving me to drive in silence. By the time I got home from campus, it was already close to 9 p.m. My parents had left hours earlier to head to my uncle's house, so I grabbed the spare keys, threw my luggage in the car, and set off into the night. My only company was Maggie, our golden retriever, who happily sat in the passenger seat, wagging her tail like it was just another grand adventure. The drive was uneventful at first, a straight shot through winding Wisconsin backroads. The light dusting of snow on the fields sparkled faintly under the moonlight, and I found myself getting lost in the rhythm of the drive. The roads were quiet, with only the occasional set of headlights breaking the darkness. About halfway through the drive, Maggie started whining. At first, I thought she just wanted attention, but then she stood up, pacing nervously in her seat. Realizing she probably needed a bathroom break, I sighed and pulled over at the next clearing. It was a small patch of dirt off the side of the road, barely big enough for my car, surrounded by thick woods. The moment I stepped out of the car, the cold hit me like a slap to the face. I shoved my hands into my coat pockets, trying not to shiver as Maggie trotted happily toward the edge of the trees. I let her off the leash, something I rarely did, figuring she wouldn't stray far. That's when I heard it. A loud, deliberate crashing sound echoed through the woods. It wasn't the kind of noise a deer or raccoon might make. It was heavier, like someone or something was barreling through the underbrush. My chest tightened as I scanned the trees, trying to make out anything in the darkness. Before I could react, Maggie bolted. She disappeared into the woods so quickly I didn't even have time to call her name. My heart dropped as I realized I couldn't see her at all. The trees swallowed her up completely. Panic set in, and I called out for her, my voice trembling in the cold air. "Maggie, come back!" But there was no response. The only sound was the distant rustling of whatever was out there. Without thinking, I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, plunging into the woods after her. The light from my phone was dim and barely cut through the darkness. The thin layer of snow on the ground reflected just enough light for me to see where I was stepping, but it didn't do much to ease my fear. As I stumbled through the trees, yelling Maggie's name, I tried not to think about what might be out there. Was it a bear, a coyote, or something worse? My breath came out in white clouds, and my hands were shaking, though I couldn't tell if it was from the cold or fear. After what felt like an eternity, I saw her. Maggie was crouched low, her body trembling, and her tail tucked tightly between her legs. I'd never seen her so scared. Relief flooded through me as I dropped to my knees and hugged her. But that relief quickly turned to dread. The crashing sound was back, and this time it was getting closer. I sprang to my feet, Maggie pressed against my side, and started running. I had no idea where I was going, but I didn't care. Maggie followed me closely, sticking to my heels as if her life depended on it. The sound of something heavy moving through the woods was right behind us, the branches snapping like gunshots. My lungs burned from the cold, and my legs felt like they were going to give out. Just when I thought I couldn't run anymore, I saw the faint outline of the clearing ahead. Somehow, we had made it back to the car. I threw the door open and practically shoved Maggie inside before slamming it shut. As I jumped into the driver's seat, I glanced back toward the woods, and my stomach dropped. 3 shadowy figures stood at the tree line, perfectly still, watching us. I didn't wait to find out what they wanted. I jammed the keys into the ignition and floored it, the tires skidding slightly on the icy dirt before catching traction. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep the wheel steady, but I didn't stop until I was miles down the road. It wasn't until I pulled over to catch my breath that I noticed Maggie was bleeding. A thin cut ran along her shoulder, deep enough to need stitches. My heart ached as I bandaged it with the first aid kit my mom always kept in the car, silently thanking her for being so prepared. When I finally made it to my uncle's house, I didn't tell anyone what had happened. I didn't want to ruin the celebration, and honestly, I wasn't even sure how to explain it. To this day, I don't know what or who was in those woods, but every New Year's Eve, I think about those three figures and wonder if they're still out there, waiting. It was New Year's Eve in 2021, and my friends and I had decided to host a small party at my new apartment in Raleigh, North Carolina. I just moved in a couple of months earlier, and the place wasn't fully furnished, but it had a cozy charm, perfect for a casual gathering. There were 6 of us in total: my roommate Sarah, her boyfriend Mark, my best friend Elena, and 2 co-workers, Ben and Nicole. The plan was simple: drinks, snacks, and watching the countdown on TV. We weren't big fans of the bar scene, so a quiet night in felt like the perfect way to celebrate. By 9 p.m., everyone had arrived, and the energy in the room was light and cheerful. The apartment was filled with laughter, music, and the faint scent of Sarah's signature buffalo chicken dip. Around 10:30 p.m., I went to the kitchen to grab another bottle of wine. The kitchen window overlooked the parking lot, and as I was opening the bottle, I noticed something strange. A man was standing near the edge of the lot, just outside the glow of the streetlights. He wasn't moving, just standing there, looking toward the building. At first, I thought he might be waiting for someone or perhaps taking a break from a neighboring party. But as I watched, I realized he wasn't dressed for the occasion. No party attire, just a plain hoodie and jeans. Something about the way he stood there so still made me feel uneasy. I shrugged it off and went back to the living room, not wanting to let my imagination ruin the night. But the image of the man lingered in the back of my mind. About an hour later, we all gathered around the TV to watch the ball drop. Just as the countdown hit the 2-minute mark, there was a loud knock at the door. The room fell silent, and we all exchanged confused glances. No one else had been invited, and it seemed odd for someone to show up unannounced, especially so close to midnight. Sarah got up to answer the door, but as she approached, she hesitated. "Who is it?" she called out. There was no response, just another knock, this one louder and more deliberate. I joined her by the door and peeked through the peephole. My stomach dropped. It was the man from the parking lot. He was standing unnervingly close to the door, his face partially obscured by the shadow of his hoodie. "What do you want?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can I come in?" he said, his voice flat and emotionless. "I've been out here all night." The eerie calmness of his tone sent a chill down my spine. "You have the wrong place," I replied firmly, stepping back from the door. Sarah locked it quickly, and we both retreated to the living room, trying to shake off the unease. The others noticed our tension and asked what had happened. As I explained, the knocking started again, this time faster, more insistent. Then, it stopped abruptly, followed by the sound of footsteps retreating down the hallway. We all sat in tense silence, listening for any further noises. When none came, Mark and Ben offered to check the hallway, grabbing a kitchen knife and a flashlight just in case. Sarah begged them not to, but they insisted, opening the door cautiously and stepping outside. A few minutes later, they returned, their faces pale. "He's gone," Mark said, closing the door behind him. "But he left this." He held up a crumpled piece of paper with jagged handwriting scrawled across it. "You shouldn't have ignored me." The mood of the party shifted completely after that. We all felt uneasy, constantly glancing at the windows and double-checking the locks. Midnight came and went, but there was no celebration, only the sound of nervous chatter as we tried to make sense of what had happened. As the night wore on, we decided to stick together until morning. Around 2 a.m., we finally began to relax, convincing ourselves that the man had moved on. That's when we heard the faint sound of shuffling outside the balcony door. Everyone froze. The sliding glass door in the living room overlooked a small backyard area, and the curtains were drawn tightly shut. Slowly, Elena reached out and pulled them back just enough to peek outside. Her gasp was audible. "He's back," she whispered. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't help myself. The man was standing on the patio, his hood still up, his hands pressed against the glass. He wasn't knocking this time, just staring. His breath fogged up the glass, and for a moment, it felt like he was staring directly at me. I grabbed my phone and called the police, my voice shaking as I explained the situation. The man didn't move the entire time, just stood there, unblinking. By the time the officers arrived, he was gone again, leaving only faint footprints in the frost-covered grass. The police searched the area and took the note as evidence, but they couldn't find any trace of him. They suggested it was likely a prank, but none of us believed that. Something about his demeanor felt too deliberate, too personal. I never saw the man again, but I haven't hosted a New Year's party since. The memory of his face at the glass and the cryptic message he left behind still haunts me. Every year, as the clock ticks closer to midnight, I can't help but wonder if he's still out there, waiting. It was New Year's Eve in 2022, and I had just moved into a small rental house in Asheville, North Carolina. I was excited to finally have a place of my own, nestled in a quiet, wooded neighborhood. The house wasn't large, but it had a cozy charm, with a little front porch and a big bay window that overlooked the street. I had planned a quiet night to myself, no parties, no big plans. Just me, a few movies, and some leftover holiday cookies. The evening started peacefully enough. I turned on a classic New Year's Eve movie, made some hot chocolate, and curled up on the couch with a blanket. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the heater and the occasional creak of the old wooden floors. Outside, the snow-covered street glowed softly under the dim light of the street lamps. Around 9 p.m., I paused the movie to grab another cookie from the kitchen. As I passed by the bay window, I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, maybe a tree swaying in the breeze. But when I looked closer, I realized there was a person standing across the street, partially hidden behind one of the lampposts. The figure wasn't moving, just standing there, facing my house. I felt a chill creep up my spine. My neighborhood was quiet, and it wasn't the kind of place where people just wandered around at night. I stared for a moment, hoping they would move or turn away, but they didn't. Trying to shake off the unease, I closed the curtains and returned to the couch. It's probably nothing, I told myself. Maybe it was a neighbor or someone walking their dog. Still, I couldn't focus on the movie anymore. My mind kept wandering back to the figure outside. An hour passed, and I finally started to relax. Midnight was approaching, and I figured the person had left by now. I decided to go to bed early and skip the countdown. As I turned off the TV and headed to my bedroom, I heard a soft tapping sound. It was faint, barely audible, but it was coming from the bay window. My heart sank. I froze in place, listening intently. The tapping continued, slow and deliberate, as if someone was gently knocking on the glass. I tiptoed back to the living room, my hands trembling as I reached for the curtain. Taking a deep breath, I pulled it back slightly and peeked outside. The figure was standing directly in front of the window. They were close enough that I could see the faint outline of their face, though it was partially obscured by the hood of their jacket. Their breath fogged up the glass as they stood there, completely still. My heart pounded in my chest as I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the coffee table. "Who are you?" I shouted, trying to keep my voice steady. There was no response, just silence. The figure didn't move, didn't flinch. They just stood there, staring. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, explaining the situation to the dispatcher as calmly as I could. She assured me that officers were on their way and told me to stay on the line. As I spoke, I glanced back at the window. The figure was gone. A few minutes later, the police arrived. 2 officers searched the yard and the surrounding area but found no sign of the person. They told me it was likely a prank or someone passing through the neighborhood, but I wasn't convinced. The deliberate way they had stood there, staring into the house, felt too intentional. I thanked the officers and locked all the doors and windows before heading to bed. My heart was still racing, but I told myself it was over. Whoever it was, they were gone now. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of footsteps on the front porch. My stomach dropped as I realized someone was walking back and forth, the boards creaking under their weight. I grabbed my phone and tiptoed to the front door, my hands shaking as I peered through the peephole. The figure was back. They were standing on the porch now, their hood pulled lower over their face. In their hand, they were holding something, a small, wrapped package. "What do you want?" I shouted through the door, my voice trembling. The figure didn't respond. They bent down slowly and placed the package on the doormat before turning and walking away, disappearing into the darkness. I waited until the footsteps faded completely before unlocking the door and grabbing the package. It was small and neatly wrapped in plain brown paper with no address or label. My hands shook as I unwrapped it, revealing a single photograph. It was a picture of me, taken through the bay window earlier that night. In the bottom corner, written in shaky handwriting, were the words, "See you next year." I called the police again, and they took the photograph as evidence. The officers stayed outside for the rest of the night, but the figure never returned. I didn't sleep at all, staring at the window and wondering who they were and what they wanted. To this day, I still don't have answers. Every New Year's Eve, I think about that photograph and those chilling words. The thought of someone watching me, standing so close, makes my skin crawl. I've since moved to a new house, far away from Asheville, but I still feel uneasy every time the year comes to an end.